But that's why we gotta stick together.
No! Bye-bye.
Today I'm here to answer the important questions. Questions that plague my mind every day. How did Shrek, the ogre we all love, destabilize a country?
Don't be fooled, America.
Well, the devil's in the details. For a series that likes to deconstruct fairy tales with its elements of parody, it doesn't ask what happens after the hero saves the day. What really happened after Shrek won? And no, not the honeymoon, but for everyone else. Do you ever wonder why the fairy tale creatures are so happy to be on Shrek's swamp after he leaves to far, far away at the beginning of Shrek 2? Despite being forced to be here in the first movie, neither Shrek nor the fairy tale creatures were happy with that living arrangement in the first movie. What if I told you the answer has entirely to do with Shrek getting his happily ever after? Their happiness with being on his swamp is because of the actions Shrek took and the decisions he made. Let's break down the world of Shrek, starting with who Shrek is. Villagers fear him. He seemingly lives away from civilization, but from the events of the first movie, we can surmise that he does live within a day's journey of the castle town of Duloc, which would be the heart of the local fiefdom, not the kingdom. You see, Farquaad is not a king. He's a lord, who presumably has to answer to someone. In this context, the macro-political conflict at the heart of Shrek 1 is Farquaad trying to establish his own kingdom in opposition to Far, Far Away. Farquaad is just a lord, and by trying to become a king, he is attempting to usurp power by taking more authority than is his right. This makes sense that Farquaad would try to do this, given how far away he is from Far, Far Away. 800 miles. 800 miles in pre-industrial medieval times might as well be a million miles away for your average peasant. Shrek, walking at a measly pace, is able to reach Duloc in a day's journey on foot, and in a few days is able to reach the Dragon's Lair. With this, we can make a few assumptions. One, it's probably summertime, given how no one in any of their travels in these Shrek movies seems to give any real mind to exposure, which means that the days themselves are probably fairly long, which means that Shrek, walking around 4 miles per hour over a 14-hour day, would be able to travel around 56 miles a day. This puts Duloc Castle at most 56 miles away from Shrek's swamp, but based on the time of Shrek's arrival the next day, it's probably around half that distance. In, let's say, a 3-day march, this puts the Dragon's Lair at most 168 miles away from Castle Duloc, but probably a little less. The swamp is close enough that Farquaad has jurisdiction over it while being a sort of aloof ruler, and the swamp is remote enough from his town so he considered it an appropriate place to dump his undesirables. These small details are important because the scale of distance between all these points of interest establish why characters act in the fashion that they do, why Shrek is so saddened to leave the swamp in Shrek 2, why Farquaad considered the swamp his,
A quest to get my swamp back. Your swamp? Yeah, my swamp.
etc. If we really look at the first movie from Farquaad's perspective, we can begin to empathize with him a little. He's a small, unremarkable lord that King Harold tasked with ruling an unremarkable part of his greater kingdom. His castle town Duloc is made to look comically perfect in a parody of Disneyland, or rather Disney World. This makes sense since his castle town is very close to a swamp, much like Disney World is in Florida, and Far, Far Away is clearly a parody of Hollywood, which would also be very far away from Miami. The distances don't exactly match up, but close enough. Duloc Town being the way it is Farquaad's way of compensating for the rampant crime. There are bands of men that waylay travelers. Our protagonists only escape in part because Shrek is an ogre and Fiona can fight, but even he didn't get out unwounded. There are also bands of vigilantes. Simultaneously, there's a harsh police state too. Yet, Farquaad's soldiers are largely incompetent, and Farquaad doesn't seem to care for their well-being either.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Farquaad's vendetta against fairy tale creatures is just him projecting on the most vulnerable in society, the outcasts, the freaks. He can't clean up crime in Greater Duloc, but he still wants to project power, so he goes after a demographic that won't fight back. So Farquaad's a villain, right? We should all hate him and be glad that the dragon ate him at the end and that he's being slowly tortured to death.
Staying alive! Staying alive! Oh, oh, oh.
Well, maybe not. A weak leader is better than no leader. And he's not weak for lack of trying. What Shrek has done, in fact, is create a power vacuum that no one is going to adequately fill. Farquaad's quest for a princess isn't purely a vanity project either. He has ambitions for his little realm of Duloc. Far, Far Away is 800 miles away from Duloc. In Farquaad's mind, there is a legitimate reason to be seen as more legitimate by his subjects. He's the only authority for 800 miles, and something needs to be done about the lawlessness in his land.
But there's robbers in the woods.
Today it might just be the merry men waylaying travelers. Tomorrow it might be something worse. Farquaad lashes out at the fairy tale creatures because they represent an existential threat to his perfect world. Right or wrong, Farquaad is trying to create a kingdom and is willing to sacrifice his subjects' lives to make it happen. In Shrek 4, Rumpelstiltskin wages a war against the ogres, and everyone is worse off for it. Without a strong leader, Duloc's people are not only left to their own devices against petty banditry, but also to hostile foreign powers, in this case actual evil magic powers from witches. The people in the land formerly known as Duloc are essentially a people without a country, and are almost completely defenseless should any outside organized force present itself. Those princesses in Shrek 3 are each from their own kingdoms, and so have no claim to the throne of Far, Far Away. And sure, they're friendly with Fiona and her mother, the queen, now, while they await the new ruler of Far, Far Away. But how will their relations differ when there's a trade dispute between one of their kingdoms? How friendly will they be with one another if Arthur turns out to be a weak and ineffectual king? How nice will they be with Fiona as they order their knights on Far, Far Away's borders? They may act nice, but they'll eat each other. So Shrek created a power vacuum in Duloc, which left complete chaos in its wake, and then he abandoned them all to flee to Far, Far Away. That's why all those fairy tale creatures were so happy to party on this swamp after he leaves. The only thing chaos fears is true authority and force, which the reputation of Shrek still inspires. The other fairy tale creatures were just happy to have a few days or weeks of peace. A more ambitious Shrek would have given them that. A more ambitious and caring Shrek would not have fled to Far, Far Away after decimating Duloc's leadership. He would have stayed and established his own rule over Duloc instead of being content to hide away in this swamp with his happily ever after. And Shrek was the best person to do it. Shrek was in the perfect position to seize the reins of power. He would have even had a dragon at his beck and call. This alone could have made Shrek and Duloc a rivaling power to even King Harold and Fairy Godmother in Far, Far Away. King Harold isn't exactly a strong king himself after all, being basically a puppet for Fairy Godmother. King Harold is the kind of man to send an assassin after his son-in-law instead of just telling him he's not welcome in his family. So it wouldn't be hard to imagine a scenario where Shrek could become not only Shrek the Lord of Duloc, but also Shrek the Conqueror. Shrek who rose from the mud and the swamps of Duloc to not only save fairy tale creatures from oppression and earn respect from his ogre kin, but to go on and topple Fairy Godmother, the ogre's natural enemy as a magic user. But instead, Shrek ran from the gauntlet of destiny and chose to count his own blessings in his swamp. He not only ran from lordship in Duloc, but also from kingship in Far, Far Away when he allowed a barely legitimate, unprepared twerp who didn't even want the throne to rule in his stead. Shrek destabilizing a country by running away actually doesn't even seem that crazy when you remember that Shrek running away from his own family, too, is the entire conflict of the fourth movie. Parody is at the heart of the series. And Shrek's journey is a parody of the hero's journey. And in that, Shrek himself is the ultimate parody of the hero archetype. Shrek is the Ray that stayed on the desert planet to wait for her parents. The hero who never joined the guild. The Will that never told Uncle Phil about needing an apartment. The Frodo who just never left home. An ultimately selfish decision against the greater good. But that's part of Shrek's charm in a way. He's a parody of so many things, each with their own layers. A parody of an ogre, of a villain, and of a hero. It's onions all the way down.
You know, you're just jealous that you could never measure up to a great ruler like Lord Farquaad.
But this video is dragging on too long. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to support the channel.